I discovered that there is this wonderful distinction you can make between low power feelings and high power feelings. Now, there's probably, in fact, there is a ladder of feelings running between these two, but I want to help us draw the distinction in the first place between the low and the high. See, low power feelings of frustration, anxiety, overwhelm, angst. These are low power feelings and they have an incredible impact on us and how we behave. An extraordinary impact, and we're going to be exploring that. High power feelings enable us to behave very, very differently. These are very different, and I'm going to be asking you, even in this workshop, to become more awake to our low power feelings. We have a lot of these during the day. Do you remember, only 15% of adults are fully anchored into their creative self, where that's their predominant experience. The vast majority of us are working with and managing our reactive selves, and this is our feeling experience when we're doing it most of the time. I want to draw that to your attention, not because it's a downer, but because this is also how we can begin to get far better agency over the patterns of reactivity that take us over when we're in that feeling state. So this is a very important concept that I want to share with you. And now, this is a low power feeling, right? This is a low power feeling. Now, I know that many of you don't sit on your desk all day, I can't quite approximate that, But in actual fact, and if you're in a meeting with others, you probably don't do that, but you're probably feeling quite often things like that. I don't know if you remember reading, or some of you know Daniel Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence all those years ago. But he has a great story about a man who went to his GP and the GP used an ambulatory blood pressure measurer to measure his blood pressure over a period of 24 hours. This is now some years ago. The Emotional Intelligence book is aged, but it's still a great text. Anyway, the GP then sat a couple of days later down with the man and looked at his readings and wanted to inquire about how he experienced his day. So I noticed some things were happening at 9 o'clock. What did you do at 9 o'clock? The patient said, nothing much. He was a male patient. Yeah, not very much. Well, you seem to have a relatively strong response. Your blood pressure went to 190 over 127. Oh, really? Well, was there nothing? Well, I had a team meeting. Didn't think anything of it, really. Well, your blood pressure your heart rate's gone from resting of 72 up to 95, and it stayed there for most of that 1 hour. How was that meeting for you? It was all right. No big deal. A little irritating, maybe not. The truth is, his body was in a lot of stress. He had a lot of feelings. Inside, he was doing this, but he kept a straight face. In fact, he was working really hard not to feel anything or not to notice his feelings. But I can tell you, I can promise you that the people in the room with him, they would have known. They would have known because his behavior would have been affected by it. His behavior. His body had high levels of cortisol, adrenaline. His left ventricular contractions would have been very high, his heart rate high. I know this. I used to teach human anatomy at university. It would have all been going. There would have been a show happening inside and a whole lot of hormonal responses as a result. But the truth is, he didn't really know. He was not paying attention. I'm hoping that we might pay more attention to this. Now, the high power feelings, we don't always prance around the office looking like that, although it may not be a bad thing if more people did. I think it's a great thing. But truthfully, we know when we're in the flow. We know when we're in the flow. And we know when we sense our connection. We have a sense of spaciousness, joy. We even may have a deep sense of purpose. So the truth is, these are very important things to notice. And what they tell us is this: when we're in our low power feelings, the complexity of our environment is greater than the complexity of our mind. We are in over our heads. So when that's our experience, what it means is that we might have all sorts of, we have different stakeholders wanting this, a boss wanting this, a team wanting this, customers wanting that. We're feeling stuck. We're feeling frustrated. anxious, stressed. The environment is more complex than the mind we're using at that moment. And the low power feelings are, in fact, our first indicator that we're not using our right mind yet. That the mind is not complex enough for the environment we're in. And by the way, as you know, anxiety is really common. I don't know whether you read Hugh Mackay, a wonderful Australian sociologist who's written many books, and he's much loved by us Aussies here as he's talked about us and helped us understand ourselves. He says that Australia is in an epidemic of anxiety. That's how he describes it. He says actually a good deal of the Western world probably as well, but the Australians, we're in an epidemic of anxiety. He is an Order of Australia. He is an extraordinary, well-rounded, many doctorates from all over the place, honorary doctorates. But that's how he describes our culture right now. We're in over our heads, but we're working hard not to pay attention to it. We're really working hard not to pay attention to it. In our high power feelings, that's when we experience the sense of openness and joy, a sense of appreciation, of purpose, and that's when we know the mind we're using is at least as complex as the environment we're in. So what's the outcomes of that? It means that in our low down here, when the complexity is greater than our minds, all we end up doing is putting out fires. We're making sure bad stuff doesn't happen. We're trying to play not to lose. We are all the time trying to prove ourselves because bad things can happen and our whole mind is wired to see threat. And our heart rate, our whole body is responding as if we're in a threat. When we're experiencing our high power feelings, well, here's where we can deliver to the objectives that we believe we ought to be, and we live and put our lives on purpose. We also may have an enduring sense of joy or satisfaction in our work. And so I have an extraordinary contention to make with you. I actually think that these feelings are not just the indicator of the complexity of our mind, but they are in fact an access to a more complex mind. They're our access to them. So they're probably both. There is a feedback relationship here between low power feelings and all the way over here to putting out fires. And this is that continues to reassert itself as a cycle. And this is where we can actually interrupt it. And this is where knowing this can mean we can start to behave differently. Why am I so keen on you becoming aware of these two polarities? So that you can make finer distinction and catch earlier when you're here or where you're here. Well, this is why. Because if you're not awake to having low power feelings, then you're going to do things to give yourself relief from the feelings. And what you're going to do, and I'm just going to go back a slide because I want you to see this fabulous little animation I've got going here. Your rank provided by your role gives you options to relieve your uncomfortable feelings. And so when I press the button, it drops down again. I don't know. That probably costs me, I don't know how much additional but there it is. I paid a lot for that little bit of animation. But I wanted it that way because I wanted you to know that we engage in certain behaviors that gives us a relief. The first kind of behavior you might notice that gives you relief is drinking a glass of red wine. Have you noticed? A lovely glass of Shiraz can just ease off. We've got strong low power feelings and it can just ease them off. Ease them off. And so, and what I really mean by that, I don't mean to mix my metaphors, but it helps us float up a little bit more to high power feelings. But here's the bummer, it drops back down again. Have you ever experienced the lovely lightheadedness of a glass? I'm a real lightweight with wine. I can drink a glass of red wine and I start to think, I'm actually thinking I'm connected to the divine. One glass of good red wine, I really feel I'm in the flow. Whatever's coming out of my mouth is actually pretty spot on. But I notice after about 20 minutes, the feeling goes and I'm back to my normal self. Then I start to look around. I note if I'm anxious, I'm unsure, back to my daily worries. This is why we want to keep drinking the red wine, right? No, I'm not promising, I'm just explaining how. It just gives us relief from low power feelings. But this is not the only way. We actually use our power to get rid of low power feelings. So let me explain. You see, controlling is a way to lessen low power feelings. Do you find you push yourself too hard and maybe push others? Do you become intolerant of perfections around you? Do you compare your work to others and to see whether you're still on top? Do you involve yourself in conversations that are really not about your work, but you feel you must be involved? See, these are all behavioral strategies that those of us who have a controlling tendency do, and I'm going to go back again here, do to give us a temporary relief from feelings. We float a little bit up towards high power feelings, but the trouble is it doesn't work and it drops us down, and then we have to do it again and again. If we have a tendency towards controlling, we will use whatever rank we have to give us that access and to give us access to those behaviors. Truthfully, it's really hard to do those behaviors with people who are 2 levels above us. We can't push for perfection or become intolerant of little mistakes with the work of 2 people of the work of a boss 2 levels above. We become actually relatively accepting. Have you noticed? But if we have a tendency to control, we can do that where we have the power for that. We have the freedom to be like that. We can voice all we want about the standards it must be in the context where we have that. And we are using our power to lessen the pain of low power feelings, to float up momentarily, then float back down. But controlling is not the only way we do it. You see, we also do it with compliance. See, those of us who are in compliance, and I really relate to this, we float up a little bit from our day-to-day worries by spending time with people in our teams we feel more comfortable with, by avoiding conversations around underperformance, for instance, by lessening our work on edgy projects that we think could disrupt things, by voting to do work that might be less disruptive on the organization, or even wanting to smooth over conversations. This is how the compliant manager, by their use of power, doing those things, just floats up a little bit away from uncomfortable feelings, only to find that eventually it floats back down. And there we get into the loop. The anxious compliant manager going out again and mixing with the team and making sure everyone's smiling, and then floats back up while all the real conversations are not happening yet. This is how a manager is exercising their power to distance themselves from the emotional turmoil, to distance themselves from the difficult conversations, from the edgy work, from having to disrupt. They're utilizing their power to distance themselves from that and to float back, but ultimately only to float back. So how does the protecting to do this? Of course, I think you know. How does we as protectors, I'm a big time protector, right? When I separate myself from my team that's creating, and I become aloof, I float back up again. I can feel safe again. When I start finding the fault in others, when I become superior and wait for everybody else to get it right, when I remove myself and become more self-sufficient and less reliant on anybody else, this is the nirvana for the protector. And we do this, right? I engage in those activities. When I want to get myself intellectually really right and stand on my ground, then I'm engaging in to lessen the pain of the low power feelings, float up toward the high power feelings, only to find that it's temporary, it's not portable, and that I'm using my power to do so. I'm using my power. I'll find the context where I can do this. I'll find the context where I can. And we have a lot of context to do that if we are a manager. And the higher we go up, we have more context to do it. We really do. And it's harder for others to challenge us the more senior we get up and the more we are open to misusing our power. And when we do misuse our power, we're really fundamentally doing it to see whether we can float ourselves up from low power feelings toward high power feelings. But it's a behavioral strategy which is often quite skilled behavior. The intellectual nuances of the protector, of which I count myself in one, very much so, might be highly skilled. It's what Professor Chris Argyros from Harvard called skilled incompetence. It does not get us where we want to go. It simply doesn't get us where we want to go. We continue to find ourselves engaging in behavior that is in fact reactive, that does disengage others, that doesn't align teams, that doesn't inspire performance. It's extraordinary. It doesn't give us. It's skilled incompetence. But I don't want to say that to beat up on ourselves. I want to say it just to be clear that it's not giving what we want. We want to be able to gain access to these high power feelings and do it in a way that's self-sustaining, that's portable from one context to the next. And today I'm going to share with you more about how to do that. How to gain those feelings. It's because if you don't know you're feeling them, or if you tolerate persistent low power feelings, you become very vulnerable to all of the strategies we use to float up away from them, only to float back down. And the behavioral strategies we use can be otherwise known as controlling, protecting, complying. This is one lens through which to see those reactive patterns. They're exercises of power to relieve ourselves from uncomfortable feelings. And we tend to do it more where we have more rank or authority.